Welcome to Tony Martignetti Nonprofit Radio, coverage of the National Conference on Philanthropic Planning. We're in San Antonio, Texas, on the Riverwalk in San Antonio. With me now is John Jensen. John is Senior Vice President and Consultant with the Sharpe Group in Arlington, Virginia. The Sharpe Group is based in Memphis, Tennessee, but John is in Arlington. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tony.
Pleasure to have you. Your seminar topic is Planned Giving Program Audit. Is your program up to snuff? Why is an audit important for a planned giving program?
One of the problems with planned giving is there's such a long lead time between the time people initiate a marketing effort, they start to talk to donors and the like, and the time you actually see the results. We typically find that it takes about 4 to 5 years from the time that somebody starts a planned giving program, actually gets the marketing out, and starts talking with donors, to the time that most organizations can count on seeing any degree of serious spendable cash coming in. So with an audit, what happens is you go in and you sort of take a look at things with a 5-year lead time between the time for marketing to the point where we actually see the money. An awful lot of things can go wrong and a lot of bad assumptions can get made. We uncover those issues and those errors, point them out to the charity, and help the charity to fix them so that their revenue actually increases over time.
Okay, so at what point in a new program should the audit begin? Should it be in the first year, second year?
An audit can be done any number of times. I would say that the types of, the time periods that are probably best for an audit are when a program is just getting started. Basically, you do kind of an assessment and figure out what kind of potential exists. Then you invest based on the potential that you identify. What other good times are when you have a brand new planned giving director or a planned giving or a vice president for planned giving coming in. Somebody new comes in that's got sort of a honeymoon period, and they have an opportunity to make some significant changes. So bringing in an outside pair of eyes to kind of look at a program that identifies the strengths and weaknesses and assist them with a whole series of factual analysis approaches really makes a big difference in the success of the program.
And you just alluded to something, this should be done by an outside set of eyes.
It really has to be.
It's not the director of planned giving just taking 3 days to assess his or her program?
You really can't do an internal assessment, in part because what happens is there are so many things you've been doing that you're blind to some of the things an outsider is going to see instantly.
Okay, so you want to have the value of that outside set of eyes, and what kinds of expertise are you looking for in hiring the right person to do your audit?
What you want to do is you want to get somebody who has been working in the planned giving field that has preferably at least 10 to 15 years of experience in planned giving, has worked with a whole series of different charities preferably, and you want to have somebody that has worked with charities that have active planned giving programs for at least 5 years at a specific charity. Because if it takes 4, 5, 6 years to actually see the results, you want somebody that has watched this from the start of a program to the time it begins to actually mature and generate revenues, so you can see the results.
Okay. Do you think it's important that the person have had experience in a charitable mission that's similar to yours, or is planned giving fungible enough that that's not really significant?
I don't think it's important that the auditor have experience with that particular mission, but it's important that they have a similar experience with organizations of similar structure. For example, you don't want somebody whose primary experience with churches going in and auditing a college or university, because they're different kinds of constituencies. I do personally a lot of work with national and direct mail-based charities, so I understand how they function, how they work, what goes wrong, what to look out for. Sharpe elsewhere does a lot of work with colleges and universities. You want to get somebody that understands that type of structure, that type of constituency, because the same issues tend to crop up again and again, and it's much easier to identify those.
Okay, is this something that a charity should put out an RFP for? Is it that significant, or?
Oh yeah, it can be fairly significant. I would say rather than an RFP, I mean, some organizations will take that approach. What I would do is I would talk to a series of vendors or consultants that have this kind of expertise, talk to them one-on-one and figure out who has the expertise, and then look to negotiate some sort of agreement.
Yeah.
The cost is really going to depend largely on how deep you want them to go. You know, what is at risk. For example, Sharpe had a client that was about to do a capital campaign. And the capital campaigns consultant did a feasibility study, and they said, well, we think the total goal ought to be $750 million, $750 million. And of that, roughly $250 million ought to be planned gifts.
About a third, yeah.
The planned giving director was very nervous about that. So he brought us in, and we did the analysis, and we went through, and we actually projected the demographics out. What we determined is that literally it was impossible for that goal to be achieved because the donors simply were not old enough. There were not going to be enough of them that would die off in the period of the campaign for that to be successful. We presented our facts. Based on that, they adjusted the campaign goal, and they reduced it down to a goal that was manageable based on the demographics of their donors. Some groups have a lot of really old donors. Some groups don't have a lot of old donors. You need to tie that in to any goal that you set. And of course, you never want a capital campaign to fail, so it's very important to get this right at the beginning.
And that situation leads me to what I've heard often, that a consultant can be valuable to convey a message that sometimes a board or an executive director or whatever, CEO, isn't really hearing from his or her staff.
Absolutely. In fact, we find that the biggest weakness that most organizations have with their planned giving program is the lack of continued support from senior management.
Oh,
a lot
really?
About planned giving is counterintuitive.
Is this because it's such a long lead time?
It's partly because it's a long lead time. It's partly because the people that tend to move into positions of CEO, executive vice president, even development director or VP, tend not to come through a planned giving side. And so they don't have the direct experience, but they make a lot of assumptions. For example, a common assumption with planned giving is that most of your money is going to come from your large current donors. People are giving you $500, $1,000, $10,000 a year or more. When in fact, we know that for most charities, the biggest number of bequests come from people whose average gift is under $50. It's counterintuitive.
It's just that they've been doing that gift for many years, right?
Many
They're committed.
years,
yeah.
many years.
Yeah.
And we find, for example, that a lot of gifts come from people who never make a gift during a lifetime, but when they pass away, they make a bequest. I've got one client where 70% of bequests and 78% of trust gifts, bequest gifts, came from people that had never made a single gift during their lifetime. There's a lot of counterintuitive materials involved in planned giving.
And isn't our recession also impacting the focus of either CEOs or chief development officers more toward the current and immediate gift and maybe away from planned giving?
It's always an issue with any organization because any CEO wants money today versus money tomorrow. The thing is that planned giving does not interfere or compete with current giving. They're very separate beasts.
Yeah.
What we find
but
is
people tend to think of them as mutually exclusive, who are not informed about the value of planned giving. They'll look at it's one or the other.
That's an example of the counterintuitive aspect of planned giving.
Yeah.
It really is.
So since you mentioned bequests and their importance
Yes.
in a planned giving program, what do you like to see in an audit around the bequest marketing and promotion?
Well, the first thing you want to do with any audit is you want to make sure that the organization has got age information on the file. There's certain basic demographic information you ought to have: age, gender, marital status, and preferably estimated income or wealth. You know, those are really important, but age is most important. If you don't know the age of your donors, you really can't do anything further.
Okay.
So you can get that very easily, very inexpensively, to have that appended onto your file.
And how would a charity do that? Let's go into the detail a little bit.
Well,
if they don't have it.
If you don't have it, Sharpe offers it, so do others. Typically, you would sign up, you'd sign an agreement. They would, the charity would send a electronic file to the organization that includes the name and address and identification number for the donor. Send that electronically. We run it through a system. We send back to you an appended file with that same information along with the data that we just talked about.
Okay.
They then put that on their database. Then they can run reports. You can do graphic reports. You can do all sorts of things. And you're going to focus largely on people that are age 65 or 70 and older, because the donors that are over age 70, on average, are going to end up dying within about 10 years. Doesn't mean everybody at 70 is going to die by 80, but the mix of donors over 70 is typically going to average 78, 79, 80.
Okay. What else do you like to see in an audit of a bequest program?
Once you do this, and typically you're going to look at more than bequest, the whole 9
Oh
yards.
yeah, I'm just starting with the foundation of a plan giving program.
You first of all look at the demographics because you need to know what the ranges are.
Right.
Once you've done that, you then look at the estates and you pull a lot of information out of past estates. You know, what's your average bequest size? What is the average bequest size for larger gifts versus smaller gifts? Are the people that are making bequests, are they people that have told you in advance of death? Most will not tell you. 90% in the case of direct mail-based group will not tell you prior to death. You look at what the average gift size is. You look at whether there are family members present in the estates of people making gifts to you. You look at who the other charities are that are getting these gifts. If you're competing with the same charities again and again and again in these estates and sharing these estates, then that tells you something about these donors, and it also tells you what size and type of program you ought to have. For example, I did an audit recently for an organization that was an environmental group. In about 80% of the estates, there were 6 other environmental groups that would consistently show up. Each of those other 6 organizations had active plan giving marketing operations, and they had full-time plan giving staff. This was an environmental group that had none. What that told me is that the other groups were eating the lunch of this organization.
So the plan giving program auditor is actually going into the files and pulling old wills and looking to see who the other bequests were to. Is that right? The other charitable interests?
Absolutely. You look at everything. You identify the strengths, the weaknesses. You identify the processes. You look at what is working, what is not. You look at what kind of records the charity is retaining. A lot of charities, when it comes to estates, for example, will not even bother to get copies of the will. They don't have the information. You know, sometimes you open up the files, there's nothing but a copy of a check and a thank you letter. There's a lot of things involved with this that they ought to be looking at, everything from trying to establish relationships with family members of those that have passed on to trying to figure out and target who these people are. Because if you know who they are, it's a heck of a lot easier to find other people with similar characteristics that you can then go and talk to for additional bequests.
You mentioned something excellent that I want to follow up on, which is trying to establish a relationship with family members of the deceased donor.
Yes.
How does a charity go about? I know there's a little digression, but it's interesting. How does a charity go about doing that? How do you open that door to family members?
Well, when you're informed that somebody has passed away and included you in their estate plan, the first thing you want to do after talking to the executor is try to connect with family members to thank them. In most cases, the charity will not know about these bequests prior to death, and it's a simple matter to say, look, we had no idea this was coming. This is a wonderful, thoughtful gift. You know, I don't know what it's going to be, but we really appreciate it and want to express our thanks and appreciation. Now, if they are on top of things, one of the things they will often do is see if they can do a donor story about that donor, and do it in a couple of ways. One is you talk to family members or friends and try to get a sense of who that person was, to write the article, try to get some photos and the like, as a way of sort of thanking them and acknowledging what a difference they have made. And at the same time, what you're really doing is you're marketing to other donors by putting that in your either Plan Giving newsletter or your regular newsletter. People love that stuff.
Let's go beyond the bequest promotion part of the Plan Giving audit.
Yes.
What else? What's the next thing that the auditor should be looking for?
Well, the auditor is going to look at any trust arrangements, any charitable gift annuities, any of those sorts of things. And it's amazing what we find. I had one place where we did an audit where what we found was that they were generating a couple of thousand people a year inquiring about charitable gift annuities. The Plan Giving director, the first time somebody would inquire, would get really good service. They would get back to them. They'd send me illustration. If they didn't do anything, that was fine. If they sent in later on, 6 months, a year later, asked for another illustration, she would do the same thing. But she made the decision in this particular case that after somebody had inquired twice and gotten 2 illustrations, that they really weren't serious. So she sort of ignored them, became more passive about it. They dropped to the bottom of the pile. She wasn't very aggressive about going after them. What we discovered was that in that organization, most people doing gift annuities did a gift annuity after they'd inquired 3 times.
And she didn't recognize that trend.
She didn't recognize the trend. We pulled that out of the data that we were able to get at.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. That's very enlightening
Yeah.
for that organization. How much further do we go in this audit? Where do we go beyond this?
You go into quite a bit of detail. I mean, you do a very detailed review of the estates. You look at how they're marketing. For example, I had one organization I went in, and their marketing materials were just awful for seniors. I mean, they had a glossy brochure that they mailed out. It was dark background. They had colored letters, green letters with kind of a purplish background.
Hard to see.
The type size was about 10-point type. I gave it to the Plan Giving director and I said, give this to your grandmother and see if she can read anything in here. You want to make sure it's easy to read. You want to indent paragraphs. You want to use uncoated paper or very lightly surfaced paper so it doesn't reflect back. You want to have paragraphs that are no longer than about 7 lines, not sentences, lines. Because if it's more than that, they will skip to the next paragraph and they won't read the message in there. You want to make sure there's plenty of white space. You want to use at least 14-point type in the letters that go out. You do a lot of things that are designed for senior eyes, because when you're in your 40s and 50s and 30s, you can read things a heck of a lot easier than you can when you're in your 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Is interviewing a part of the audit process? Any of the planned giving donors, interviewing them or interviewing other constituents in the organization?
We don't so much talk to the donors or constituents. That's generally not a part of the way we approach it.
All right.
We do make sure to talk to other key internal players. If there's a general counsel, if there's a CFO, if there's an executive vice president, because part of what you want to do is you want to get issues to be surfaced. You want to find out, are there things that senior management understands about planned giving that are wrong? Are there questions they have? Are they concerned about different aspects of it? With the CFO, they're going to be very concerned about risk issues. So you're going to want to have a discussion with the CFO and maybe the general counsel about some of the gift acceptance policies and why they exist the way they do and whether they should be adjusted. There are lots of ways to take care of risk that will pop up in a planned giving program. But if the general counsel and CFO are not comfortable that the planned giving staff will make the right decision, they'll be very leery about supporting the program.
And that leads to what I was thinking about is, aside from policy and process, sometimes just the relationship between the planned giving office or the fundraising office generally and the CFO is not as strong as it ought to be, and that particularly plays out in the planned giving arena.
CFOs are very financially oriented, very numbers oriented. Successful planned giving staff members tend to be oriented toward people and relationship building, and it's sort of men are from Mars and women are from Venus kind of situation. So you really want to help build that, and that's why I always try to see the CFO and have a discussion with him or her and surface any concerns or issues and try to get them comfortable with what we're trying to do and why, and talk about risk issues. And if it is not working well with the planned giving director and the CFO, I try to take steps to kind of soften that and try to get them talking and going back and forth.
Are you able to give listeners a sense of cost that might be involved in an audit?
The cost will vary dramatically based on the size of the organization, what might be involved. I would say a typical audit is going to run, at the low end, probably $20,000, $25,000.
Okay.
They can run $100,000 or more. I mean, if you look at a capital campaign where they're looking at $1 billion involved, you're going to go very deeply. In some of those things, we actually go so far as to, in effect, kill off the donors. In effect, we take their entire constituency. We statistically figure out when they're going to pass away. And it's not simply saying every 85-year-old has got a 7-year life expectancy. We go in and figure out at 85, you're going to see maybe 10% die at 86, 12% die at 87, 19% die at 89, that sort of thing. And that allows us to do very detailed projections as to what is potentially possible to raise. And one of the key aspects of a planned giving program audit is to determine what the reasonable potential for an organization is. If you understand what is possible to raise, then you can make rational decisions about what kind of money you should be investing in. Mm-hmm. If 95% of your donors are under age 60, you ought not to be investing a lot of money in planned giving. But if 80% of them are over 75, you don't have a lot of time.
Yeah. Is there a minimum number of gifts that should be in the recognition society? So let's say gifts from people who are still living, to make that would make these kinds of analyses sensible and I should say reliable. I mean,
not necessarily.
Is 50 enough? Does it need to be 1,500?
We have most groups would love to have 1,500. No. What happens with some organizations, they don't even have legacy societies, or they have legacy societies that have been moribund and they really haven't done anything for years with them. We're more interested in seeing information about existing donors overall. I want to see how many of your donors have been giving within the last two or 3 years.
Okay, so
and are over age 65 or 70.
Okay.
Those are the key metrics you want to find out.
All right. My guest has been John Jensen, and he is Senior Vice President and Consultant with the Sharpe Group in Arlington, Virginia. We've been talking about the planned giving program audit, finding out whether your program is up to snuff. John, thank you very much for joining me on the show.
Thank you, Tony. Take care.
It's been a pleasure. This is Tony Martignetti, Nonprofit Radio, live coverage of the National Conference on Philanthropic Planning in San Antonio, Texas.